Foi procurar outra esquina, deu de cara com a esperança do amor dessa menina, Odalina. O Zé disse, meu amor, que queres para trocar o andar de cama em cama, braço em braço pro meu lar. E gemeu do seu gemer, e beijou do seu beijar, e a linda Odalina já amava só de amar. Por prazer calou seu choro, ao gemer falou seu grito.
Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 100 hours. A very warm welcome to you. This is Channel Africa, the African perspective, as we bring you 60 minutes of the latest news from here, the heart of Africa, to all corners of the globe. And we will be telling you on the program today how Italy and Spain have deployed security boats to protect the global Sumud flotilla, as you know, the largest civilian flotilla, to try and break the blockade of Gaza. Live details on that, and we'll also tell you about the latest French President Nicolas Sarkozy to spend 5 years in jail. Details of that coming up. For first, your top stories.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And we start with this court in Paris finding that former French President Nicolas Sarkozy guilty of criminal conspiracy. He was cleared of all charges, including that of accepting illegal funding from Libya's former leader Muammar Gaddafi for his 2007 presidential campaign. The court will announce, in fact, has announced the sentence and the reasons behind it. The BBC's Hugh Schofield has the details.
The key news is that Nicolas Sarkozy has been found guilty of one of the charges against him. He's been found guilty of criminal association, but he has not been found guilty. He's been cleared on other charges of essentially embezzlement and illegal party funding. And I think that reflects the complexity of the case. The court unable to prove that money, euros, millions of euros arrived in his campaign account in 2007, but was satisfied that they did have evidence that there was a conspiracy to which Sarkozy was party to try to get that money.
We'll bring you analysis on that later on in the program. First, on another matter, political analyst Griffin Maruasa says Malawians want access to affordable fertilizer, food security and reduced inflation. Maruasa told Channel Africa that Malawians believe Peter Mutharika's regime rather than that of former President Lazarus Chakwera. Mutharika, whose priority is to fix the economy by cutting spending and reducing the country's debt, defeated Chakwera in this month's general elections. Marausa has more.
During Professor Arthur Peter Mutharika's regime, there was food security whereby people were able to access affordable fertilizer input, which is very key to Malawi's economy. Not only further, there was stability in terms of prices. He did reduce inflation rate in the country.
And US President Donald Trump says he will sign an executive order later in the week to dismantle what he calls domestic terrorism networks. He was speaking after a deadly gun attack at an immigration center in Dallas. The BBC's David Willis reports.
Officials are saying that they have no, at least publicly anyway, indication of the motive, but that hasn't stopped this shooting from being heavily politicized, with the FBI saying that bullet casings found at the scene bore anti-government messages and calling this attack targeted violence. And we've seen, of course, a lot of finger pointing in this country since the death of the conservative activist Charlie Kirk, with President Trump calling the increase in political violence the work of what he calls left-wing radicals.
And moving on, the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry in South Africa into political interference and infiltration of criminal syndicates in the country's criminal justice system has heard that Senzo Mchunu's function as a police minister is to formulate policing policy in consultation with the provincial governments. That's according to Head of Legal Services at the SAPS, Petronella van Rooyen. Mchunu's role in disbanding the Political Killings Task Team has been under scrutiny at the Commission. His decision was labelled as an encroachment of jurisdiction by the National Police. Commissioner Fani Masemola van Rooyen says Mchunu's responsibilities as minister must align with the country's constitution.
This ensures that the overall strategic direction of a police service is aligned to national priorities in accordance with Section 206 of the Constitution. And in this regard, it should be noted that the Civilian Secretariat for Police Service has drafted various policy documents for approval by the Minister. It includes, for example, a policy on the reduction of barriers in the reporting of sexual offences and domestic violence.
And finally, officials in Indonesia say more than 1,000 school children have suffered food poisoning this week after eating school lunches. It's the latest in a series of outbreaks to hit the president's multi-billion-dollar free meals program. The BBC's Anbarasan Etri-Rajan has the details.
The latest mass poisoning was reported in 4 areas of Indonesia's West Java province, increasing demands to suspend the scheme. One official said small hospitals in West Bandung were overwhelmed by sick students. There have been questions over the oversight of the project since it was launched in January by President Prabowo Subianto, who says the initiative will help transform Indonesia into a country that is free from poverty and hunger.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
Now let's go to our top story this hour. It is 9:07. You are listening to Africa World Hour. So we turn now to the Mediterranean seas, where the global Sumut flotilla is pressing on despite some of its most perilous encounters yet. We've heard that in an unprecedented decision, Spain and Italy have decided to send ships to assist the Gaza flotilla in a sign of increased pro-Palestinian sentiment in Europe. We saw those statements coming out of European country leaders at the UN General Assembly standing behind the Palestinian people. Now, Italy and Spain have dispatched naval vessels to assist the global Sumut flotilla. Earlier on, we heard statements of how it's faced numerous attacks, including a drone attack, drone surveillance and attacks and explosions. We heard from Nkosi Mandla Mandela, the grandson of Nelson Mandela, who is aboard the boat, and this is what he had to say.
This briefing underscores the level of desperation of the Zionist entity to stop our efforts to end the genocide and bring the much-needed humanitarian aid to the starving masses of Gaza. Let us be under no illusion that the Zionist entity that has for the past 7 decades acted with impunity in violation of international law and all human rights conventions are now intimidating us with intensified violence. Their response to previous flotilla initiatives are indicative of what harassment and violence we can expect from them. We were not unaware of apartheid Israel's propensity for violence and would be surprised if indeed they choose a different response. These acts are acts of desperation, not unlike what we witnessed during the last decade of apartheid South Africa. This global Sumut flotilla comes at a time when some of Western regimes have started to backtrack on their shameless support for apartheid Israel. Yet, none of them are doing anything to stop the genocide, forced mass starvation, and forced displacement of millions of people in Gaza. We call on governments, NGOs, CBOs, labor formations, faith-based organizations, as well as human rights agencies and people from all walks of life to bring pressure to bear on the Zionist entity to stop its violent attacks and the threats of attacks on the global Sumud flotilla. We assure our families and friends of the global Sumud flotilla participants that we will do all in our power to protect them even under difficult circumstances. We will not stop our efforts as the GSF until the genocide stops. Humanitarian aid flows freely and the Palestinian people are free. Thank you.
And that is what Nkosi Mandla Mandela, who is part of the Global Sumud Flotilla, had to say. They held an emergency press briefing earlier on to speak about what is happening. Well, let's get the point of view now to further shed light on what exactly is going on and how it impacts the mission. We are on the line now to one of the organizers, part of the organizing committee of the Global Sumud Flotilla. We are speaking to Bashira Suma, and who is also on, I'm not sure if it's the same boat because I believe there are about 50 vessels or more. Bashira, a very good evening to you, and thank you for taking the time to speak to us. I know it's perilous times and perilous time to even talk to the media.
Hi, TP. So thank you so much. Thank you for having me. And I think the media is a key factor that keeps us safe and that allows us to proceed with our mission. So thank you for making the time for this.
So you held a press briefing earlier on. We played snippets of what Nkosi Mandla Mandela has to say, but just give us a sense of the general sentiment, because we understand that Israel, even though the government has not commented on the attacks, but it has upped the ante on the rhetoric, particularly on what the Global Sumud Flotilla is, linking it to Palestinian terrorism.
Yes. So, some of what Israel and the Zionist allies are saying are not new to us. They've been saying many of these things for the past flotilla missions, where they've asked us, to dock to the nearest port and deliver the humanitarian aid there, and they will take it through. But what is new is, the scale of the smear campaigns that they're taking, specifically on some of the organizers, associating them with Hamas. When from the beginning, we've always made it clear that we are a peaceful, non-violent, civilian-led movement, and our only aim is to open up the humanitarian corridor and break the siege. So these attacks are unlike previous missions, and I think they obviously feel threatened by the scale of it and by the passports on board, because they obviously represent allies and complicit countries. We're just taking it day by day and assessing the risk, but we always knew that this was a risky mission and this was something we would face.
And tell us what you have been experiencing day by day, and when you joined the voyage, if you can just give us a sense of that, and what has it been like? Obviously, you all feel very strongly about this mission. You moved by either personal experiences or just your own humanity. But what has it been like undertaking this dangerous mission, and what have you experienced?
Sure. So, look, the voyage is split up into different parts. So there's the main fleet, and that fleet was subject to the drone attacks 2 nights ago. There's also a few boats that are hanging back and support boats for strategic reasons. So not all of the boats are together. And today the Greek fleet officially joined the flotilla. So we're trying to keep strong and strategic by maintaining one big fleet, but also some supportive boats on the periphery. Look, in terms of being part of this mission, it's been 3 months coming up. I was part of the global march to Gaza in Egypt, and we started planning this as soon as we got back. So we've been deep into it since then. and as an organizer, obviously we are more aware of the risks, and we knew this was inevitable. So I guess it's a little bit less daunting, and we were maybe a little bit more prepared than some of the participants were who joined more recently. Yeah, sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
Yeah, but it was just getting a sense of what have you experienced. We've heard, as you mentioned, the main fleet having experienced drone attacks, explosions, and we did speak to Nkosimandla Mandela, who had also told us that up until the point that they, I think when we spoke to him, were they in Tunis or Italy, but he also gave us a sense of just how frightening it is being on board. But now we have Italy and Spain that have sent naval vessels to try and protect the various boats that are part of the fleet. Can you just tell us if there was communication of this, and was it because there was an indication that Israel was not respecting international waters?
Yeah. So look, we didn't actively engage these naval ships and ask them to come on board. That was of their own accord, and I think it was in response to seeing how the Zionist entity and Israel was treating citizens from those countries. Of course, it brings its own risk in that, we want to remain a peaceful, civilian, non-violent led mission, and as much as we appreciate the naval forces into the sea to protect us, we don't want this to turn into a military intervention, because that obviously changes the nature of the mission and can change the nature of how we are responded to.
And that's the interesting part, right? For you to be able to carry out your humanitarian mission of bringing aid to Gaza, you now have a political intervention in order to protect the mission so that it can be successful. As you say, it makes things difficult. It puts you at odds with your stated intention of being a peaceful mission. But do you think that beyond this, given the statements that have come out from Israel by Israeli sympathizers, that you could need more and more physical, political protection?
Yes, and look, we, as much as we appreciate and we need the political and physical protection, we knew that we would be the ones being protected, because of the passports on board. But what actually needs to happen is those naval forces and the military intervention needs to come and intervene directly in Gaza and directly in Palestine. As it's great that we're attracting them to international waters to protect us, but our ultimate objective is for them to go straight to Gaza and serve where it's actually needed.
And as you say, you are a civilian mission, but ultimately challenging and moral, and what you say is illegal, particularly under international conventions, action, the blockade of Gaza. When you were sitting down as organizers and you were coagulating around these points, and I want to focus now on the international conventions and perhaps precedents of support on embarking on this mission, what were the conversations?
Yeah, so I mean, we knew that we would be putting governments in a difficult position here, because we're putting people from complicit countries on board. And that was, in our mind, the only way to force the hand of governments to intervene and actually take action against the Zionist entity. Because, South Africa, yes, we took the Israel and the Zionist entity to the ICJ, and a lot of other countries have done symbolic things up until this point. But now we knew that this mission would force those governments to take some kind of action and actually protect their citizens. So yeah, the conversations were around, I guess, the place we would put governments in between a rock and a hard place.
Are there specific treaties that perhaps that you were looking to, and we've seen, as you mentioned, South Africa's case in the international courts, but there is the UN General Assembly that is taking place now. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa making in his speech during the UNGA debate, saying that, it's all very well and good that there is support, but the blockade must end now. And it brings to question the diplomatic moves that must occur immediately, right now, in the next coming days. Any suggestions to some of these regional bodies that would be supporting your mission?
Yeah, look, I mean, the UN is one of them, because there's a UN resolution at the moment that we are trying to push. Although a few days ago, the US vetoed the UN resolution to take humanitarian aid into Palestine for the 6th time. So we are definitely hoping to put pressure on the UN specifically, because as much as it's been there to, so-called protect all the nations of the world, it has been acting biasly towards the global north. And I think that would be one of the key entities that we would want to influence in this mission.
So finally, what do you have in mind for the next couple of days? Do you see victory in, ahead of you in your near sight? And should you be successful in your mission, what next?
Look, I think it depends on how you define victory. We know that this is not a silver bullet, and this action alone is not going to liberate Palestine. But yes, we are definitely moving the needle. We are definitely moving towards victory. I think success of this particular mission is, one, to allow humanitarian aid in finally after many months. But we definitely plan to continue after this mission, not only with different waves of flotilla missions, but in other kinds of movements as well, other kinds of international direct action. And our ultimate goal is obviously the total liberation of Palestine. No, we don't think that that's going to happen in the next 2 days, but we think that this is an important step to move towards that.
And just one last question, and without obviously compromising your safety, are you able to count in I don't know, distance or percentage, just how far you are on your journey, to let us know how far you are really?
Look, I mean, you can see it on the tracker, so it's not private knowledge and it's not confidential knowledge. It depends on the weather for the next few days of how fast we can go, because we are a big fleet. We don't leave the smaller boats behind, so the fleet is traveling a bit more slowly than previous flotilla missions, which was just a couple of vessels. I would say a handful of days, maybe between 5 or 6 days.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, and that we're able to at least see that you are forging ahead, and we will be keeping in touch with you. Really, really appreciate it. Speaking to us regarding the mission on the Global Sumud Flotilla, Bashira Sumur is a member of the organizing committee for this largest civilian flotilla that is heading towards Gaza to hand over aid and whatever support those who are under siege need. It brings the time to 22.5+9.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
Now, the action heats up this Saturday, 27 September. Orlando Pirates takes on Loyi in the CAF Champions League Round 2 prelims live from Orlando Stadium. So don't blink, don't miss the moment. Kickoff is at 1500 hours only on SABC 1 and SABC Plus. The battle begins now.
When the sun goes down, we don't stop the talk. Channel Africa, the best nighttime radio. 1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Now, former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to 5 years in jail for criminal conspiracy over attempts to raise campaign funds from Libya. This historic ruling handed down on Thursday marks a spectacular downfall for the conservative leader who served as president of France between 2007 and 2012. Sarkozy becomes the first modern French head of state to face actual prison time. The Paris court found that Sarkozy is guilty of secretly seeking millions in campaign financing from the regime of late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. To speak a little bit more about this, we speak to Naeem Jina, senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Jina.
Thank you, Tshepiso.
So just based on what I said, this is the first head of state from France who actually faces criminal, or rather prison time. But just looking at the charges that he's been found guilty of and those that have been acquitted, overall, how would you say is this moment significant in the sense that a French leader has been held accountable for actions that he's taken in collusion with or that could undermine Africa's sovereignty?
Well, I don't know about the undermining of Africa's sovereignty, except that this whole story of his possibly being given campaign funding by Gaddafi is really related to the French actions in 2011, when just before the invasion of NATO of Libya. So, as you said, the court found that he and his cronies, his aides, had attempted to solicit funding from Gaddafi for his 2007 election campaign. That was what got him sentenced to 5 years in prison. The court found that there wasn't sufficient evidence to prove whether he actually did receive the funds or not. So the 5 years is for the fact that he solicited that funding. Now, there's two scenarios here. One is that he either received it or he didn't. According to many Libyans, he did receive it. And so if we go by that story, he received the funding, and then in 2011, as the uprisings were taking place across North Africa, the story goes, Gaddafi basically kind of blackmailed him and told him that he was going to expose his receiving funding from Libya. As a result of that, France got involved with or instigated the rebellion in the east. You remember when the rebellion began in the east of Libya. The other version is, let's assume that he didn't receive the funding. He didn't receive the funding that he tried for, but it was already getting out that he had solicited the funding, and he needed of the main witness to this whole conspiracy, which was Gaddafi and those around him, and so saw this opportunity in 2011. So this kind of thing of how,
Yes, you can finish that train of thought.
No, what I was saying is that this kind of thing of how Europeans get involved in bribery and corrupt practices with Africans, and then go out of the way, in fact, to undermine an African state, an African nation, as a result of their personal issues.
And that last bit, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I meant about undermining African sovereignty, or an African country's sovereignty, because part of what is out there is the allegation that it was a quid pro quo deal, that Nicolas Sarkozy would have promised leniency for Gaddafi's brother-in-law, Abdallah Senussi, who was convicted in France. And that also goes to the issue of the rule of law, against the accusations, constant accusations of African countries not adhering to the rule of law because of corruption.
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Gaddafi, there were more than one of these kinds of deals that were made. Remember the Pan Am bombing the aircraft as well. I mean, it's widely believed that the guy that was finally handed over, the Libyan intelligence agent, was handed over and went to prison as a result, that he actually wasn't the one responsible. But a deal needed to be made in order for sanctions to be lifted off Libya, and so it was. But that I think Libya is, in a sense, in terms of your question, a bit of a special case, partly because it was a state that was very rich and was able to throw money around in that kind of way. But when you look at other states on the continent, they might not be rich in terms of liquid finance, but rich in terms of resources. And the manner in which money from Europe is thrown around in order to buy the rights for these resources, leading in some cases to actual wars and thousands of people being killed. We're seeing this in Central Africa taking place, mining rights in DRC and other places, with Israelis and others being involved. So Africa really has for too long been this kind of a playground. And there's also a Tsipi, so we must say that there's a bit of a kind of racist element here. The assumption by Europeans that Africans are easily bribable. And so, we know of stories of big corporations in Europe that actually have line items in their books for bribing government officials and others in African countries.
And again, I'm glad that you raised that, because it does raise, in general, the nature of the relationship with a big European power which enjoys veto powers at the UN General Assembly, like France, which is often painted as a beacon of hope when it comes to democracy, against I go back to the issue with African partners. So Sarkozy being held accountable in this manner, what message does it send in whether or not Europe is finally opening its eyes to the kind of shenanigans that happened in backroom dealings, and who actually should take accountability? Because, as former President Thabo Mbeki has often pointed out, there is the corruptor and the corruptee, and it's often put on Africa as being the one that's corrupt, and that's where it ends, that they're the corruptor and corruptee.
So if we look at the news coverage of the Sarkozy story, the story isn't so much about Libya. It's not so much about Africa. And Libya features as, in a sense, a necessary footnote in the story. But he's going to prison because he violated French laws and undermined French electoral processes. It's got nothing to do with what he did with African states. The fact that he might have actually launched a war that resulted in the loss of tens of thousands of lives. All of those things is irrelevant, and this is what the point that you're making, Tsipi, so that when we talk about the rule of law for European or global North states, I should say, the rule of law means how do they make sure that their own people among themselves behave themselves? They can misbehave towards people of the global South, particularly Africans. And, I often use this example that at the beginning of the 20th century, when Europeans were making a big thing about the rules of war, about, having laws, how to regulate wars between themselves, Germany committed 2 genocides in Namibia at that time, because these Africans are really not on the same level. The rule of law, international law, etc., is designed to apply among Europeans, not the others. And so that's why I say that in the Sarkozy story, Libya is just a necessary footnote. The people that he tried to entice were Libyans, and that's where that story ends. But the problem with Sarkozy is that he undermined electoral laws. That's why he's going to prison.
So he's been acquitted of Sarkozy of passive corruption, embezzlement of Libyan public funds, and illegal election campaign financing, to your point, because the manner in which this is framed is that his actions are alleged to have helped rehabilitate Libya's international standing. And yet when you look at the sentence, obviously he's been not given a get out of jail free card, but the sentence itself has been deferred, so to speak, that he's not going to jail right away, but in a month's time he's got to report to jail, even though he can appeal the sentencing.
Yes, this is one of the unprecedented things about this, is that he's not going to be allowed to be out of prison while his appeal is in process. He has to sit in jail while the appeal takes place. And I think that part of it is that Sarkozy is not a first-time convictee. Is that a word? In 2021, he was convicted on a number of charges relating to corruption, etc. He wasn't sent to prison, but he was he was under kind of house arrest, had to wear a bracelet on his ankle bracelet, etc., and only had it removed because he turned 70. And in France, when you turn 70, there's some leniency. So he's a serial violator, and I think that that's the reason why now they're not letting him be out while he's appealing the case.
But that's interestingly enough, he apparently can request conditional release because of his age. And as you mentioned, this is part of Sarkozy's mounting legal troubles. He's already been convicted on 2 other cases, the Big Malion affair of his 2012 presidential campaign and the Bismuth case involving corruption and influence peddling. Is he an anomaly in terms of French politics or even European politics? And I'll bring it back to Africa, how they deal with African countries.
We don't really know whether he's an anomaly. I mean, all the news stories are saying this is unprecedented, the first time a president's going to go to prison, which is true. But, we consider that Jacques Chirac, another French president, was also convicted on similar kind of charges, electoral fraud, kind of.
And unfortunately, it seems that line didn't hold out for us. So are you with us, Naeem? All right, it seems like we've lost that line to Naeem Jannah, senior researcher at the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, just speaking to us about, as he says, an unprecedented event. It was breaking news that former French President Nicolas Sarkozy is to face 5 years in jail. The conviction has to do with allegations against him because of criminal conspiracy. That's what he's been found guilty of in relation to Libyan campaign funds related to former President Muammar Gaddafi. And we're just speaking about the impact on this and what it really says about France, Libya, and French-African relations, and including the global south and global north. That brings the time to 23 minutes to 10.
Africa's story is told in 1,000 voices, each one vibrant, each one essential. Listen, learn, and celebrate together. Broadcasting in 5 different languages, connecting the continent. This is Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Okay, let's tell you about this showdown in Soweto this Saturday, 27 September. Kaizer Chiefs face the Kabuskop in the CAF Confederations Cup at the iconic FNB Stadium. Who will dominate the pitch? That's the question we're asking. Tune in live at 1500 hours on SABC. And it's on and it's everywhere.
Tshepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
This week in Johannesburg, the 9th China-South Africa Trade and Investment Promotion Conference drew Chinese and South African business delegations in a bid to deepen ties and sign new deals. Among the outcomes, several memoranda of understanding between local firms and Chinese companies were signed. China is signaling accelerated zero tariff access to certain South African exports and fresh pledges of Chinese investment in mining, infrastructure and green industries. We joined now by one of the organizers, Benu Pillay, Chief Operating Officer at Murient International Exhibition, to speak to us about the recently concluded conferences and, of course, the agreements. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, everyone.
Mr. Pillay, can you hear us?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, now we can hear you. Thank you very much. So let's talk about the strategic objectives of the conference first before we talk to the deals that have been signed.
I think if I can probably highlight a couple of the main ones, we definitely wanted to deepen the business cooperation between South African and Chinese businesses. We also wanted to expand the investment by Chinese into the South African market. And obviously, we wanted to use this platform to build the trust between both the parties. So these were some of the key objectives what we were looking at. And if I look at the outcome, or if I can judge based on the outcome, the number of people who came in, the number of MOUs being signed, and also the feedback from both the sides, we had a great event in the last 3 days.
And given what is taking place in New York at the moment, we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa in conversation with the U.S. Chamber against the backdrop of very tenuous conversations with the U.S. government. How are you using this to your advantage, if not to further, but perhaps even rebalance the investment trade conversation with South Africa?
I think probably the current geopolitical situation probably created kind of an urgency for us to fast track some of the programs we were planning in the region, and also probably expand the scope. This is the 9th year we are doing this event in Joburg. So probably it used to be a traditional B2B exhibition format, but here this year we had 2 conferences along with it. One was a China-South Africa Trade and Investment Conference, which was partnered by the Embassy of China in South Africa and also the Ministry of Trade. And also we had the Ubuntu, the Smart City Conference. I think so the current situations probably prompted us to expand the scope.
And we know that the regulatory environment has often been one of the major conversations, and in some cases a bugbear for some investors. I mean, I'll use the Northwest as an example. Some have lamented the companies who have been coming their red tape. Some have lamented policy uncertainty. Some have spoken about the regulatory environment. So there are risks that are involved. On both sides, how were they able to circumvent this, South Africa, China, and which sectors are most primed for strengthening the bilateral relationships?
I think if you look at the sectors, general infrastructure, renewable energy, and probably mining, I would put these 3 on the top. But what was really surprising this year is we see a lot of interest in digital economy, in terms of green technology, and also e-commerce and logistics. And these were some of the sectors which got highlighted during these 3 days, which was these were the so-called non-traditional areas what we have seen support coming from.
All right. So can you expand a little bit more then on some of the MOUs that were signed, and what would be? Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. I think we had about 28 of MOU signed in the last 3 days. I think there are quite a few discussions which are just starting. The connections have just been made, so I would say that they're very fresh. And also probably there are some discussions which are ongoing. But I would say that probably significantly what we have seen is there are a couple of them in the electric battery. Lithium battery. So this is very interesting. And also in food manufacturing, we are seeing some interest, and also in mining. So these ones seems to be very promising. And I can say that there is some capital already being committed to these sectors.
Are you able to share how much? And when you say an e-commerce, are there particular projects that are already underway, especially from a Chinese perspective, that is bringing capacity to our shores? And also, there has often been a challenge of skills transfer where there has been an accusation that Chinese companies coming here with their own human resources and there's very little in terms of passing on skills to South Africans so that they capacitate them, that should they move out, that they are able to continue with the projects.
I think probably, as you mentioned, like these were some of the concerns from the South African side in terms of technology transfer, in terms of training, and in terms of capital investment. These were some of the concerns. I think what we have done is we have effectively engaged the government from both the sides, because I think in the past there has been some regulatory obstacles what we faced. So we are trying not some of those, I would say that some of those gray areas not to happen this time around. So I think I would believe that that has been taken care of in those discussions 3 days.
And what other groundbreaking agreements came out of this conference?
I think other than this MOUs, probably, we have about 400 Chinese companies who participated, who are exhibiting their products at the show, and they manufacture themselves. We had about 22,000 visitors. I mean, this is a B2B show. So 22,000 visitors who participated, who visited the show. We also had about 740 matchmaking meetings which we organized during the show. So these are very strong indicators in terms of the interest from both the sides, and the prospects are very good for them to conclude deals or continue the cooperation in the next coming months.
And I want to look at particularly small to medium enterprises. And, we often talk about a people-to-people cultural exchange, and that also extends to business. The way in which business is done in China is not the same way that is done in South Africa. So there can be an equal exchange of good practices there. What can be highlighted as those that would be very good key performance indicators of what would be acceptable for both to say it's beneficial, and this is why this conference is in its 9th iteration?
I think if you specifically talk about how we want to judge the outcome, or how we want to quantify the outcome, obviously we are looking at the number of MOUs signed. We will be looking at the total amount of investment which is made through the platform. We also will be looking at how many jobs have been created by some of these projects. And also, obviously, in terms of repeat participation, how many of these exhibitors or how many of the speakers and the visitors are going to come back to this event. These are some of the indicators what we will look at to evaluate the outcome.
All right, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Much appreciated. Speaking to us about the 9th China-South Africa conference that has just taken place. That is the Chief Operating Officer, Orient International Exhibition, speaking to us about the various memoranda of agreements that's come out, or understanding that's come out of that summit in the sectors that will benefit both countries.
This September, Channel Africa celebrates Heritage Month, a time to honor the stories, the rhythms, and the languages that make us who we are. Whether you're in Lagos or the shores of Zanzibar, to the mountains of Lesotho or the markets of Dakar, we are united in diversity.
Najivunia kuwa Mwafrika.
Kutondolera Afrika.
Proudly African and fabulous.
Let us preserve our languages. Let's embrace our uniqueness. Let's embrace our cultures and celebrate the beauty of our continent. Channel Africa, the African perspective. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tshepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
And it is now 11 minutes to 10 as we lead you up to African Diaries with Sheila Ndikumana. Let's tell you about air pollution. It's the silent crisis in Africa. That's according to Greenpeace Africa. Recent reports by the organization have revealed that air pollution causes over 1 million premature deaths each year, making it the second leading risk factor for death on the continent. It says the main culprit is fossil fuels. Sisi Sekhalo has more on this.
Air pollution is contamination of the indoor or outdoor environment by any chemical, physical or biological agent that modifies the natural characteristics of the atmosphere. According to the World Health Organization data, almost all of the global population breathe air that exceeds WHO guideline limits and contains high levels of pollutants, with low and middle income countries suffering from the highest exposures. Greenpeace Africa indicates that 9 out of 10 biggest sulfur dioxide hotspots in Africa are from the thermal power plants, with South Africa being a hotspot, with 6 of the 10 largest world's nitrogen dioxide emission zones being found in South Africa, and largely from the coal plants in Mpumalanga. Climate and Energy Campaign lead for Greenpeace Africa, Cynthia Moyo, says some other countries are also experiencing air pollution.
It's Morocco, it's Egypt, that also has some of the largest polluting power plants in North Africa. And we also have Nigeria with the oil and gas flaring, which continues, to pump toxic gases into the air.
Communities are breathing harmful air without even knowing how bad it is. Moyo adds that many governments are failing communities in this regard, and that they have realized that while governments should be protecting people's health, in many cases, the governments are found to be protecting the polluters instead.
What's interesting is that, our report has really exposed or brought out how, most African governments are falling short. We've seen that there's very few countries that have the proper air monitoring systems that we need. And where, these laws actually exist, we find that enforcement is quite weak. South Africa, I'll bring it home again. South Africa, for example, still allows, coal power plants to operate even though they are among the world's biggest, NO2 and SO2 hotspots. In Nigeria, we've seen that there's gas flaring that continues despite, the long-standing pledges to end that. Statements such as, from our minister who said that we cannot stop mining for fresh air are statements that show that, the political will is quite lacking in our governments.
Associate Professor from the College of Human Sciences at the University of South Africa, Professor Masilo Masikameni, highlighted that environmental health practitioners are facing challenges in improving air quality monitoring and management. He elaborates on those challenges in South Africa.
One is the issue of less emphasis on specialization, which have left now air quality abundant in the country, which is a key mandate of environmental health practitioners. The second issue is understaffing. Obviously, then now we are more reactive in terms of being proactive. And as I said, lack of staff then now lead to our environmental health practitioners being overloaded to render all municipal health services without isolating certain skills and certain number of people to focus on a particular problem. And another issue is the evolution in terms of technology and training. As the technology changes, we really expect a different way of approaching things. The use of low-cost sensors, it is eminent and is working elsewhere, especially in the much developed countries or your global north countries, where in terms of their own focusing, they are very much advanced. But in South Africa, we are lack because there's no financial budgeting or financial injection in terms of improving air quality space.
Member of Executive Council for Health and Wellness in the Gauteng province of South Africa, Nomantungo Moralehoko, says the relevant government department should be able to act on emitters.
We are emphasizing that the Department of Environment, they must do now help inspecting some of those companies, like in the R Road and other bigger companies that we have. They must be inspected, because if we don't inspect them and put necessary measures for air quality, you remember that air quality must be cleaned. They must be cleaned. So those are the things that the teams are doing and the teams are talking about. That's why if they find companies that are not doing clean air, those companies are penalized. So that's why we need to strengthen on the regulations and act where there is wrongdoing.
For Channel Africa, I'm Sisi Sekhalo in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, South Africa's Minister of Electricity and Energy, Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, has announced that government will end load reduction within the next 12 to 18 months, possibly sooner, with community cooperation. Speaking at a media briefing in Pretoria, Ramokgopa said the country had already turned the corner on load shedding, pointing to improved power station performance, with the energy availability factor now consistently above 7%. He also acknowledged the steep rise in electricity costs since 2007, promising interventions to ease the burden on households and businesses. Channel Africa's reporter Michael Mbewe reports.
The announcement comes after government declared that South Africa has already turned the corner on load shedding, with the energy availability factor rising from 48% at the height of the crisis last year to consistently above 70% today. Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa said the focus has now shifted to ending load reduction within 12 to 18 months or sooner if communities cooperate.
So now today I'm announcing we're ending load reduction. So I repeat, we're ending load reduction. The period we have set ourselves is anything between 12 to 18 months, but it can be exceptionally shorter than that. And I'll explain to you why that 18 months period, because it's a function of how we get to be received by communities. And I'll tell you how we're going to address that situation. So I want to say to the country, we will end load reduction. If there's a absolute cooperation by communities, we'll end it in the next 12 months.
The confident Ramokgopa reiterated that South Africa has turned the corner on load shedding and is now working towards its complete elimination.
And as we have reported previously, is that we have turned the corner. We are not about to turn the corner. We have turned the corner on the resolution of load shedding. And I said to the country that I'll be the first one to stand before the nation and state boldly that we have ended load shedding. And that before that time comes, I want to say that we are doing everything possible to eliminate it.
And that is South Africa's Electricity and Energy Minister Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, finishing off that report by Michael Mbewe, who says that the minister says sooner or later South Africa will be without load reduction. Brings the time to 3 minutes to 10. So let's take a look at what's coming up on African Diaries this evening with Shayla Ndukumana. Hello.
Hi. How are you all?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Listen, I'm frazzled, but for different reasons. Let's get into today's conversation. We are talking all things Talk Thursday, right? So this is a play on TikTok, but also talking trends on social media. I didn't know that it was World Oral Health Care Month. I'm not going to lie. That conversation is yet to bite me, is the reality. However, we're talking all things dentistry. You're talking cleaning your teeth. How often do you go to the dentist? Is it an option? Is it something that you do frequently? What's the counsel that you've received? Because I know that you go there twice a year at most, unless you have issues, of course.
Yes, but I also think it depends on... I think it depends on your upbringing. So if your parent either believed in more or less, that's what will set your routine in terms of how often you go for your checkups. I think it's with all other things. I find even our eating habits, they are established at a very young age. If you grew up in I always say the country, but listen, given my mother was a country chef. My mother was a country. There was no Coke. Okay. There was no fizzy, nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of sodas because of that. So I think a lot of that is the lessons that are drilled into. And that's a funny thing. I grew up not really liking fruit.
Oh.
Yeah, we didn't. Firstly, my grandmother has like oodles and oodles of fruit.
Yeah.
So we kind of ate fruit because we had to, like pawpaw, lemons, avo.
Yeah.
You name it, we had it. So at home, my mother didn't really buy fruit unless we brought it back home from my grandmother's. It took me up until my really late 30s for me to be like, hey man, I like you. So the one fruit I love is watermelon.
Okay.
Watermelon, lychee is like your very water-based fruits.
Yes.
That's I naturally have a love for. But others, I was just like, and that's because we didn't really have that.
That is fair. But you know what's really interesting is that we're now seeing trends come up on social media that speak to how you can take care of your teeth without a dentist.
Yes.
Right? Coconut oil. Have you heard of that? Bicarbonate soda.
Bicarbonate I've known for a very long time.
Does it actually work? Is the question.
I mean, it does make some sort of an impact. I saw one that actually, like, you take a banana peel, you mush it up with You've seen that one, right?
Yep. I've
Does
seen
that
it all.
one work?
Listen, I'm not a fan of the idea of bananas being in my mouth for cleansing. I can't do that. It's just, it's a strange thing. Listen, that's what comes up on African Diaries this evening.
Politician, let me end it there. That's it from Africa World Hour. Good night.